Hello, 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 hello. What is the date? 21st?
Checking.
This is January 22nd, 1988. We are sitting in the very handsome library of the Springfield Art Center, and we are here to do Section 2 on the history of the Art Center. The first section was last week with Dot Johnson, Louise Staley, and Don Johnston, relative to the very early beginnings of the Art Center when it was in the arcade, and even time before that, when they all felt so good about the fun they had scraping the floors of the arcade, which were liberally coated with chocolate syrup from the chocolate dipping family that worked in the arcade before we got there. They were also talking about the satisfactions that they had in creating something really pleasant and worthwhile. And both elderly ladies and Don felt about 3 inches taller when they were through with this recitation. This afternoon, Pat Catron is with us, and she will introduce all the other voices that our transcribers will hear. So as you introduce people, will they each say something, for instance, so the transcriber knows who is speaking from their voice quality. And for one of these, let's put this recorder up here, perhaps, and this recorder down here, hoping to be closer. So, sorry about that, Jane. So that our transcribers can hear more clearly. Then when you're through, let's pause for a minute, rewind, and be sure we're hearing ourselves. And then we'll go on.
Do you not think it might be well for each person to introduce themselves?
Good idea. That'll do.
I'm Pat Catron, the director of the Art Center since 1970, and here with us today are various people who have worked before that and since as volunteers of the Art Center. We will let them introduce themselves. How about you?
I'm Jane Hollenbeck, the perennial student and lover of the Art Center.
I'm Betty Rohr. I've been a member since 1961, sometimes off again, on again student, and I too really dearly love this place.
I'm Ralph Weatherby. I've been a member of the Art Association since 1968, and I've been associated with the board and general activities of the Art Center in trying to make it a better place for the community of Springfield.
I'm Janie McGregor. I was first chairman of the Women's Committee in 1970. And I think the Women's Committee has accomplished a great deal in the years since.
Okay, this is Mary Cook, about to confuse the issue by checking tape recorders and being sure that
Anybody have any notes or anything that we are to refer to, or is it...
I think we're
bring any.
extemporaneous.
We're
Yeah, I
extemporaneous.
don't know anything except what happened in the early days.
Well,
I
that's
did
important.
put down a few
But they've
dates
done
and things
that.
that I particularly remember.
What I particularly would like to do is start as far back as we can. And I think 1967 is a pretty good date to start with, unless you have memories earlier than that. Do you?
I don't
Well,
have the
anyway.
dates clear. Like,
Yes,
we
I-
had a show on the Esplanade,
Right.
and I don't remember the year. I had all those, I turned over a whole bunch of those newspaper articles to the front office
We
not too
had
long
those.
ago.
Was that when you were here?
No,
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 What?
that's
On East
old
High Street?
Zimmerman.
No.
Oh.
I'd have to check that out.
But I don't remember the date of it. I didn't make any notes because I had no idea what you wanted.
Sure. Janie, how far back do you go?
Well, I can remember when they first had a watercolor painting class at the YWCA.
Oh.
And they were sort of sitting at little desks and sort of doing postcard-sized paintings, very delicately, like China painting. And I was saying, feed in the color, and it hurt their feelings. But I think we also had an art show there in the halls of the YWCA. And then, of course, we had lots of beautiful shows at the Women's Town Club and Country Club. We had big dividers. Oh, they were productions, but they were really beautiful.
Was that what year? Do you remember?
Oh, I think it was in the 50s.
Those,
Could have been the 40s.
no, those things at the country club were in the 60s, because I was chairing those things.
I
was
see.
in charge of entertainment at the club at that time, and we decided we ought to put the art center in front of the public a little bit, but we did draw from the country club membership
Mm-hmm.
to put on the show, but we borrowed any number of things to physically put it on out there.
Did you do
We
that
did it
more
2
than 1
years.
year? Oh, 2 years.
2 years.
One of my early notes says that 1946, the Springfield Art Association was formed. That would be
Mhm.
after your YW experience, I think.
After, yes.
And Helen Morgan was the president, and you were the treasurer.
Me,
Yes,
treasure?
you
Can you
were.
imagine?
Well, we haven't gone broke yet.
No, that's true.
Well, one of the early days reminiscences that Dottie Johnson
kind.
remembered was that in response to my question, what did we do for money, Dottie? She would say, well, we paid a lot of light bills in the arcade from the Johnston family coffers. Apparently, the dues were $3, and people paid infinitesimal little pennies, which was typical of women's organizations, I think, at that time.
This, I think, though, was not strictly a women's organization.
No.
It was started with both men
Oh,
and
not at
women.
all.
Yes.
We had a lot of fine
Absolutely.
men artists, didn't we, Ralph?
Yes.
Back in the old zone.
Right.
And they really were involved in every little thing we did.
And the teachers from the public schools came to the art center, and the art reviewer section from the Collier, when that all folded, they all came to the art center just to be involved.
And worked for nothing, too, didn't they,
Yes.
back in those years? All of the instructors
Oh,
did.
yeah.
Mhm.
That was all gratis. And not, some of them less qualified than certainly what we have today, a lot less qualified, but good,
But willing also.
willing,
Indeed, yeah.
giving.
Mhm.
And so you can say that the school has come a long way. I don't know, I'd have to look back and see how many students you had in those days, but today we have 15 to 20 instructors each year, throughout the whole year, and between 500 and 600 students each year.
I don't have those figures, I couldn't tell you.
We had pretty good children's classes. Mrs. Staley sort of oversaw that, and I remember teaching up there, and they were a good start.
Did you teach both in the arcade and on High Street?
I taught definitely at the arcade, and I can't seem to remember about High Street.
Virginia Hess had very successful,
Yes, I
well-attended
did.
classes
Yes, I
at
did
the
both.
High Street Center.
Was she also taught here?
Yes, I think
Building
she
too.
did. Then Dottie Johnston took up a lot of floor space with large floor looms,
Oh,
Yeah.
my
and we
goodness.
did a lot of weaving and tapestry looms.
She did that when we
Oh.
first moved here.
She also moved the looms here.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Did the popularity of weaving decline? Was that
That's what
became less-
eventually happened, but
Macrame came
yeah, that kind of.
in. Hanging baskets.
Well, she started her weaving in the arcade, I think,
Oh, yeah.
because I remember
Yeah.
taking a class.
Well, that would have been in the 1950s, probably, at that point, and this is 1988.
But we
Way
also
back.
had a lot of seminars. Remember, we would have about a 2 or 3 day seminar, and we'd have all different facets of
Mhm.
art being taught by our faculty. And we drew from Urbana and all the little towns around here.
But then, I think one of the, interesting things was when they had the shows and people from the field had a watercolor society, and they really were into good watercolor, and they would bring their things to our shows and win all the prizes. So then they said, well, I don't think Greene County should be allowed to put things. We should have our boundaries. And from then on, I think there's been a little bit of feeling. Because
We are the Western Ohio watercolor. Are they?
they're a separate, they're an entity unto themselves.
I see.
They put on their own show, isn't that right?
Yes,
Pat?
however, they were formed here. Betty Nagy, who was one of our teachers at the time and a member of the Ohio Watercolor Society, decided that that would be a good thing to do. The Ohio Watercolor Society met in Columbus mostly, I think, and people would have to drive from all over the state, so they began to have these separate organizations which were affiliated with the Ohio but could meet in their own area so that people could get to meetings a little more readily. So Betty Nagy formed the Western Ohio Watercolor Society here. Trying to think, maybe mid-70s. And these people who belong to that come from all over South Central Ohio. We have a big contingent from Dayton.
Betty has come back to Springfield, hasn't she? Didn't I?
To
hear that?
live?
Yeah.
No, not to live. She still maintains her membership, and she brings paintings for our shows, for their shows. Sometimes members show too.
She's living closer to Springfield than she did for a while now.
Upper close
She's
to
still in
Chicago.
Chicago. Yeah, well, she was a fine teacher.
Well, it's rather obvious that within these activities there had to be a developed financial structure from the days when we charged $3 to the days when we're supporting a building like this. Would you like to speak on the development of financing of the Arts Center?
Well, the financing was really spearheaded by Mr. Paul Helmuth. He was very much interested in the development of Springfield, and particularly the Art Center, and he wanted to kind of set an example of what could be done. But prior to that, the Kiwanis Club in 1967 had this as their project, and they raised $140,000 to build the first front part of the building here. And it was a tremendous accomplishment. The monies came from the people of the community, and we thought that it was going to be adequate. We found out that we didn't have enough space, and then this is where Paul Helmuth comes into the scene. And he raised $350,000, and we were able to start the building in 1973, and it was completed about 1974. But it was through the work of Paul Helmuth and the members of the Art Association and the interest of the community that it was successful.
When you say this building, you mean how much was there not an addition to this building, and are we not sitting in the
You're
addition?
sitting in the
We're sitting in the addition.
About what was its date?
The cost of the building?
No, about when did the second? What was the cost, and when did the second?
Well,
Building program
this started in 1973.
So it was really rather quickly
Yes.
on the heels of the first one.
That's right.
We grew so quickly we hardly knew what hit us.
Were you active,
Isn't that
Betty?
right, Ralph?
Yes, that's right.
Were you active during the '67 fundraising for the building?
Yes. We canvassed the town.
Yeah.
Bailey.
Eldon Bailey.
Eldon, was he involved with Kiwanis?
Yes.
Well,
He was the one who
he
them the
set
idea.
up the whole system of canvassing in town. And I think there wasn't anybody in town we didn't ask. It was well done. It truly was.
I remember going to a tea, I think at your
We had a
house.
series of teas.
You had a
Oh, yes.
series of
There-
teas, and I
that's
think
right.
one at Weatherby's house, where Eldon had did he not have a model
He
too
had a
of the
mock-up.
building, and
Uh-huh.
spoke on what was being envisioned and in trying to get support.
Oh, we had many meetings, teas, just to inform people that you would have assumed knew something about the art center or knew it existed anyway. They were completely ignorant of it. But they did come through for this building, didn't they?
That's right.
Well, you were active back then too, Janie, weren't you?
No, I don't believe I was. I just don't seem to have much recollection of that period.
How about you, Janie? That was
Not particularly, really. I think I became more involved in about 70.
Well, I remember when this building finally got built, and we needed so many things. Remember, Ralph? We used to come down, we'd scrub floors. I mean, after a new building has been built, you've got a lot of cleanup. And just to get the materials together to have classes
That's
was...
right.
I remember because one of the little jobs I had at that time was the education committee, trying to get qualified teachers, trying to get the materials for the children's classes together, and keep them in any orderly manner, because we didn't have bins, we didn't have the equipment that we needed quickly enough. But it worked out. I mean, everybody pitched in, everybody did everything.
And as far as the school is concerned, we had excellent teachers like Roy McAdams. And Milton Kramer, of course, is still here now.
That's
And
an institution here.
Yeah.
and we had the cooperation of the school community, and all of that helped. But the way everybody worked on the in 1968 and 69, getting this thing established was just tremendous.
It just was just a will that it's going to happen, and if we couldn't get, couldn't afford the things we really needed, we'd do it ourselves, and we did.
I wanted to back up a moment to Herman Hunter. In my interview the other day with Dot Johnson Louise Staley, I think it was Louise who commented about how devoutly interested Herman Hunter was, and how he looked at every block that went into this place and just kept its quality up. She said she thinks there should be a plaque in this building somewhere in his memory. He was,
That's true.
she was hopeful that would occur.
Commemorated,
It's his design.
yes,
Yes.
both the original building and the addition were his design.
Didn't he die shortly after this section was completed?
Yes, yeah.
I thought it was too bad he didn't get to live to see its potential.
I think it was Paul Helmut's vision that really prompted and made so successful this edition.
I was told that Mr. Helmuth donated a great deal of money to this building, or was the donor. Is that true?
Well, if he wasn't, he knew where to get it.
No, that's right. He had lots of contacts with various foundations, and he helped direct some of their funds here. He himself also did a substantial amount, but it was primarily from various foundations in the country.
He was reputed to have been one of the premier fundraisers in the whole country too, and he raised money for Harvard. He lived in Boston a good part of the time, for Notre Dame, and for a number of other. Well, when he died, I know there were at least 25 well-known charities, including places like Boys Town, that were were benefited by his will. And so in working with those kinds of categories in a national capacity, so to speak, he was able to bring these monies in. And I understood of the $350,000 that he collected for us, that part of it was fees that he had received for doing work for these various organizations. And then in addition to that, he also started our endowment fund in that year for an additional $50,000 in 1974.
He was one of our better assets.
Right, indeed. Now, Betty, you might talk about the little gallery starting. You were in on that, were you not?
Oh, golly.
That was 71.
It was the year of the first ball. I recall that.
That would have been 70 then.
That we opened the little gallery. We wanted to have it open the night of the ball. So we went to the board and got permission to set it up very much like the nearly new shop has always been set up, with consigned items. The original idea of it was a showplace for our students and our local artists. Art shows weren't quite as popular right then as they have become. So this was the whole beginning. And the night of the first ball was the original opening of the little gallery that was located on the other wing of the building, on the south side of the building. And, oh wow, we hung pictures, we called, I remember Mary participated in that first showing, do you remember?
Yes, I do.
I called everybody I ever knew that had ever created anything, and we wanted a representation of their work, and we got a very fine reaction. We hung it all, and we climbed around on ladders, and we begged the board to find enough money to give us some carpet for the floor. Remember that, Ralph?
Mhm.
And
Well,
we found a good buy on that awful looking red carpet.
I thought it
got
was
it.
pretty. I thought though that the board couldn't afford it, and you ended up paying for it. I think Connie and Ralph ended up paying.
I think maybe we did.
Yeah,
Did
I'm
you
sure they
really?
did.
I never knew that. I'm the one went to the board and begged.
This is the kind of reason why we end up doing these things, because
It's great.
items come out that aren't in the history.
Yeah.
And if you don't want that reported, when we take this, you can cross it out. But I think it's an honorable thing to confess to.
I do too.
Well, and
I
that was,
did a good pitch, didn't I?
That's right. But talking about the financial part of the operation here, you can see that we had very few funds to work with, and there was a very active group of young women at the time who came up with the idea of having a very, very nice ball here. And thanks to Janie and many of the other people, Martha Rogers, we had the ball, and the profit that was made from the first ball ran into 5 figures.
I thought it was $10,000.
Just
It
a little,
was.
just a little over $10,000. That's right.
The first one.
That was the first ball,
Amazing. Really is.
and that was just amazing to
It was
everybody.
fantastic.
And what was the last one? Considerably more.
Well, the
Gross in the 50s now.
yeah.
That's impressive.
Isn't
That's
it?
very impressive.
I want to add something here, though. At that time, that was the first year I was here. And Betty Rohr and Martha, and I don't know whether you were you in on the first one too, Janie? Anyway, the girls wanted to have a ball, and the board kept acting like, oh, it might be a failure. And then I said, well, no, it can't possibly be a failure, because how they had worked it was that we would sell tickets to this ball and have a band, and all of the members would donate food for the midnight supper. So there was hardly any way we could lose money on it. Anyway, the board was saying, well, how much money do you think we'll get? And I said, well, I had no idea. And so someone finally said, well, if we make $2,000, it's a lot more than we're going to have. So we were ecstatic when we made the $10,000 that year.
Well, our biggest projects up to that point had been those stupid spaghetti dinners we'd have at the old building. And we'd be lucky if we made $75.
And you
The
worked like
10,000 is
Trojans.
really a reflection on Martha's marvelous
Yes.
organization.
She
She
organized
was
that
amazing.
ball.
Well, I think the
She
Art
really
Center has
was.
been blessed through the years with marvelous business women and men. It's been consistently very high quality leadership.
That's certainly
That's
so.
true.
And also all the membership has been so willing to work, because I can remember that year and for several years after, up until 74, I don't know whether we were ready for the ball in 74 with this particular part of the building or not. But the first several years, when we had to clean out the sculpture room, and people like Tommy Matthews would come and carve turkeys, which he had cooked, and all the gals would come in and butter the bread and rolls. You were in on that detail.
Certainly was.
I was trying to stay clear of the kitchen.
Oh.
Oh, it was a beautiful
You did other
kitchen.
things.
Beautiful kitchen. Oh,
Well, the kitchen was really designed by Janie.
beautiful.
Janie McGregor.
A lot of
Indeed.
people.
It was your
But it's been a wonderful
guidance, though, that really conceived the kitchen, I think, as I recall.
The kitchen's been a background, a backbone for so many activities here. That you have a kitchen is wonderful.
It is.
What's our gross budget now, for instance?
It,
Roughly.
roughly between 1 and 200,000. But I always say also, Mary, that goods and services donated by the membership amounts to somewhere in the vicinity of 100 to 125,000 in
Mhm.
addition to what we actually lay out in money to pay for things.
We should bring up our permanent collection.
Okay. When did that get started?
Since, well, when we moved into this building, we brought some things from the old High Street place. Some of them we didn't want to bring, but we felt we had to. I won't name any of them, but I remember a bunch of us sitting and looking at collected things that
Had holes punched in them.
that said,
Oh,
now
dear.
is this a keeper or is this a piece of trash? We moved a lot of things from there, but as a permanent collection and a place for it, of course, didn't happen till till the back part of this building took.
Was the vault then
It was
contemporary with a permanent
built
collection?
yes, well, it was built when this
It's part
section
of
was
the
added.
74.
It's a new edition.
The new
Oh, it's a
addition, yeah,
edition.
this section, so that we would have a place, the proper place to store it. But I think I am not as acquainted with the permanent collection as I would like to be, as I should be, but I think we have some outstanding pieces. And I think it's something for the size of our organization to be proud of.
And the interesting thing about it, too, I think, is that a large majority of the pieces have been donated, not only by Springfielders, but by people who have come to see the Art Center and have been impressed with its quality from out of town. And one of the big emphases for starting that is for the growth, because as you said, there were some few pieces before 1970, but after that, we definitely needed something to show visitors when they came into the building. And I remember when I was first here, and people would come in, and we would be between shows. We'd have nothing on the wall because we were putting up something, and they'd all be around on the floor, and people would come in and say, I thought this was supposed to be an art center. Where's your art?
We're not the only ones that did that.
The first things I did was to say to the instructors, would you please bring me an example of your work? It'll do two things. It'll be something that I can have on the wall at all times, and also when people come in to take classes and say, what type of thing does this teacher teach, I can show them your work. So that was sort of how it all evolved. Then also, the students could learn from good art that maybe they hadn't seen in their own homes and so forth. So that's approximately how that all evolved.
When did the Photographic Society achieve its particular area in which to work?
You mean their gallery? Their gallery?
Well, their
over there?
gallery, and I've never been in that back dark room, but it is a dark room, isn't it?
Well, wasn't John Reedy awfully
John Reedy.
involved with the
Yeah.
Photographic Society?
Well,
The
for a long
photogra-
time, didn't they rent space or use the space for their monthly or weekly meetings, whatever it was?
That's right.
And then they finally asked to, as their own group, be group members of the center. So we created a group membership for them.
But they met even back on High Street, Betty, according to John Reedy.
John was a former president of the Art Center.
Do they have their own equipment, do they? And they have their own space? And
They
block space?
they helped, but they very definitely helped equip the dark room when the first part of the building was built, and I think that was so they could meet here and use it. Traditionally, since I've been here, really since 1970, they have not used the dark room very much, but they do continue to meet here and keep their memberships.
They don't use that space?
Well, most
much?
of them, no, we use it for our photographic classes, but they do not. They come here and meet and have contests and lectures and seminars on how to improve their photographs, and also they are world acclaimed. They've over the years have won international prizes a number of times.
But that space is utilized for photography. We can't afford to have any wasted space
No,
here.
oh, we use it. We use it.
That's our girl. Well, I just have never been in there, and that's why I was looking
It's a
forward.
small room, but it's adequate. Everyone seems to think it is adequate.
We don't waste anything in this place. I remember, do you want to hear a funny one? And I won't name names. But we had a little old lady in our class in the Zimmerman building, and we were in Roy McAdams' class, and she brought in her own still life setup, some fresh fruit, and she sat it all up, and we helped her drape behind it and light it for her, and Mac was saying, can anybody else in the class use this setup? And she said, no, it's my fruit. Well, that was all right. We went on and worked on something else. But it went on for several weeks, and the same fruit sat there. And finally, someone said, you know, this fruit's got to go. It's beginning to draw gnats. She said, don't anyone touch it. That's my lunch today. This is the last day I'm working on this. And she ate it.
Oh.
Dear.
Goodness.
So you see, we don't waste anything in this art.
We don't.
Indeed.
That was funny. I never forgot that one.
You're right.
Well, Janie, then in around 70 to 74, you became active.
Yes,
Why don't you tell us some of the things you did?
we did a lot of exciting things. Really, the purpose of the Women's Committee was to help raise funds, which certainly were needed. And so we started into various activities. We took bus trips. That wasn't to raise money, that was to have fun. But it was also very educational.
PR.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then we did try desperately to take a couple of trips to Europe. We did make two, one actually on our own that went to Germany, Austria, and Italy, and that was great. Really through Ralph, I don't know how he ever found about it. A group of us went to Russia with an art, it was really originated in Washington, D.C. 5 different art groups, schools and groups. That was fun. And then we went to Italy with the Indianapolis Museum, which was not too many of us, but good. I think one of the most exciting things that happened was bringing Sotheby Park Burnett to the Art Center. And I think Howard Noonan was very influential in setting up those arrangements.
I always thought you did that, Jane.
Well, it was the Women's Committee, but I think Howard, through contacts, managed to bring them, and that was wonderful. Lots of fun, and many people didn't understand it at all. They came to appraise.
Mm-hmm.
We had a cocktail supper, a preview, and for the price of your ticket, which was $25, I guess, you had saw the preview and had supper and got one free appraisal. And the next day, it was open to the public, and people came in, and for $5 or more, they would get appraisal or appraisals. And I wish we could have had them again. I guess they no longer do it.
We had people stacked up
Oh, it was wonderful.
clear out to the front door.
And they
in
had
line.
6 experts here. One who appraised silver, one porcelain, one painting.
An Oriental, I remember.
Yes.
Yeah, rugs.
And I don't remember, I guess brass or pewt or something. But that was really exciting and fun.
That was a good thing.
We also had people come to that from various states. I know of
Yes.
Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Kentucky. We probably had Indiana too, but I just don't remember now, but I know of those 3 states because we did a marvelous job of advertising that.
That was good. All the balls, I think, have been interesting and lovely. Each one bigger than the one before. And one funny thing, I think, was the second ball, and we used antiques that we borrowed from members, and also from the Historical Society. I never will forget George Burkhofer was head of the Historical Society, and very cautiously lent us 2 oils. Pat, the man and his wife, who were they? And during the evening, at some point in time, George Burkhofer went up to Connie Weatherby. I think Connie was in charge of the exhibit, which were all the antiques. Said, Mrs. Weatherby, somebody stabbed Mrs. Somebody. And surely enough, she was horrified. And surely enough, someone had put an elbow through the oil painting, which since then the Art Center, I think we've all finished it. It's perfectly lovely.
Well, and something that's good, that was like the ill wind that blew some good, Mary, because the Historical Society did not know who the artist of this painting was. Her husband was painted by S. Jerome Uhl, and we sort of assumed that she was too, but there was nothing on it to indicate. Well, the painting had gotten discolored over the years, you know, so when we took it to Weebles to have it put in top-notch shape, the name of the artist was visible then, and also some architectural detail behind the woman that, you know, at first when you looked at it before it was cleaned, just looked like a bust with nothing behind it. So when it was all cleaned up, here was this lovely architectural detail in the back that had been obscured for years.
Good.
Oh, and didn't you have slides made of some of the balls, and then you
Oh,
showed
yes.
them on a...
Yes, that
That
was
was
great.
beautiful. They
That
were
was-
lovely.
We probably ought to do that again this
Yeah.
year, you know, we haven't done it for
That
several
would be
years.
fun. I think another interesting thing is that in, I forget the year, when Gerald Ford was running for president.
That was 1976.
76.
Yeah.
Somebody from Washington called the Art Center And Dorothy, of course, answered the telephone, Dorothy, the secretary. And this person said that the president would like to come to the Art Center, have a rally, and told her the time with the date. I forget what the date was. And what was June the 7th, as a matter of fact. And it was a Monday, and she said, well, I'm sorry, the Art Center's closed on
That's one of our funnier
Oh,
stories
that's
around
wonderful.
here.
And didn't they have to give the flag twice or something? There
I
was
don't
something
particularly
about-
remember that, but
They
we were
presented a
horrible.
flag from
Yes.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Well, it stayed open and was filled with Secret Service men going through that kitchen and opening all the
They
cupboards.
went
We had to get,
through
everyone
this
had to
place
get out
like
completely.
Grant took
Oh.
Richmond. It was turned upside down, wasn't it?
Yes,
It
really
was indeed. And of my own personal remembrances, I was in Washington just before that week, and when Bob picked me up at the airport, he said, guess what? President Ford's coming to the Art Center. And every once in a while, my husband would do those types of things to kid me, you know, and I said, oh, well, that's great. I said, I hope he likes the show we have on or something. And Bob understood that I didn't believe what he was saying, and I said, I think it's just entirely proper that since I was in Washington, Jerry Ford should come to
You
Springfield.
arranged the whole thing.
So anyway, before we got back from the airport, he had convinced me that he was speaking the truth. And when I arrived here and did see all of these Secret Service people, it was sort of a mind-boggling type of.
You wanted to go back to Washington.
Well, what happened was they wanted a sign that said "Welcome, President Ford," and it was Friday afternoon by that time, and I said, Friday afternoon, tomorrow's Saturday, everybody will be closed. So somehow or another, he
Closed city.
insisted that he had to have this sign on Monday, and here it was 5 o'clock Friday. So I got on the phone and called Charlie Lemon, who had the awning place across the street, and asked him if he thought we could get this done. And he says, oh, sure, I'll meet you at my plant. I said, well, let me go home and change my clothes and get a bite to eat. And then, and Patty Keenhole was working for us then, and he brought a man and who did the lettering, and Patty and I and Charlie Lemon went behind him with red brushes like this, filling in all of this, and got it finished by about 11 o'clock that night so we could put it up for the president.
That
I
is
guess
a
he was
good
happy
story.
we got it.
I hadn't heard that one.
Well, getting back to the kitchen,
Yes.
we had a lot of luncheons and dinners. Always made a little money, not a great deal,
always had delicious
but it was
Food.
good food, and had quite a few of the service clubs, Kiwanians, and I think maybe Lions, I'm not sure, Sertoma, quite a few. And then we started doing little wedding receptions, which they still do, more and more, I guess. We had some lamb cookouts, which were great fun. And I never will forget Sig Sanders. We were going to have a tossed salad for 100, and it was sort of appalling. Not only doing all of the greens for 100 people, but mixing everything together. And he said, I'll tell you how we'll do this. And he got a huge green bag, like you put leaves in, and threw all the greens in, and took a whole bottle of Fishbone dressing and threw it around.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It was delicious.
And no hands either.
That's right, it was delicious.
So it's a good way to toss the salad.
A lot of funny things happened in that kitchen.
Great.
Do I understand they have a cooking class going on now?
Yes,
Yes.
we do have.
Great.
Whose cooking class is that?
Heidi Thompson, she's a professor at Wittenberg and quite knowledgeable about cooking.
I should join.
I'm
I should
joining.
too.
Are you?
Next Wednesday I'm going. It's quite small, as it has to be.
Yes, no more than 8.
That's right, but Mark, I don't remember his last name, at the
Wine store.
wine store. I don't think they give us the wine, I think we have to buy
Yeah,
it,
you have
but
to pay for it.
we will, according to whatever the menu is, bring the proper wine or wines.
Good.
That would be fun to learn about.
Speaking of Gerald Ford, how did Mike DeWine get in on this art contest?
Oh, well, that started because they, I guess, just called us up one year and said that there was this 7th Congressional District. Well, it's not just 7th Congressional District, it's a nationwide congressional art competition. And any House of Representative person who wants his district to participate in it can, but they don't have to. And so the first year that Mike DeWine was in office, he decided that it would be a good thing to do in the district. So there are 9 counties in the district, and we organized a chairman from each of the 9 counties. And then here at the Art Center, District 2.
But it started here in Springfield.
Yes.
That is, as far as this district is concerned.
What year did they complete the new city building downtown? We were quite involved in the Art for the City Fund program. In fact,
You were.
I was personally representing the Art Center, and then we had George Ramsey from Wittenberg, and
Anna Mary
Well-
Byerly, wasn't she in that? Didn't Anna Mary Byerly?
she was not
Judge?
involved in anything I was. Well, I was leading up to what this
Oh,
show
sorry.
was. We were very involved in the whole aspect of it. Let's see, who were some of the other people? I can't remember the name of the one girl who is so involved in the beautification of the town.
Nave?
Nave.
Marianne?
Mary Ann Nave, right. She was on that committee with Carol Gatman. Carol was still a city commissioner at the time, and this was her baby. And we had many meetings, and we selected art from all over Ohio submitted. We watched slides. Well, we had many sessions looking at slides from all over. Then the final thing was a show held here. We received works from anybody who wanted to bring it in, and we had a public vote on it. Instead of having it juried, we let the public select the art. The idea being that everybody in Springfield should feel they had a fair chance at their city hall art. So it was rather interesting. We juried later on in the show, but we accepted everything to begin
And then the
with.
jury was a secondary
That's right.
stipulation
Yes.
from within
Yes.
that collection.
Well, it had to be that way. But it was quite a
It was a big job.
contribution to the town, even if nobody likes the
Oh, dear.
sculpture.
We didn't choose, nobody in Springfield chose the Oracle. I'm
Well,
sure. Is that Ohio Arts?
well, our
Ohio-
committee worked on that.
Oh.
We really did. We were submitted some mock-ups, and the truth of the matter finally came to me. The artist whose work we really did select was, for some reason or another, not qualified to do it, or rejected the commission, or something happened. I never got the whole complete truth of it, because I was out of town when this happened, and we had already made our selection.
But it wasn't that one.
And this isn't exactly the one that was originally
I see.
selected. I'll just put it that way. And I think a small part of our committee had to, considering time they had involved, select something quickly, and they took it upon themselves to do it, which was all right. I mean, we all had worked together over quite a few months, and we knew how we each other felt about some of these things. But the one that we really did select never materialized. So we have the Oracle, and I think it suits the building very well myself. I don't object to it. I think they're probably, well, that's a whole other subject.
Yeah.
When did you start your rental program for the banks and?
We did that early on. I don't know, Janie, that I can tell you the exact year, but we, in the old Security Bank, was where I think our first patron, I think Phil Keppel called me up and said they needed something on their walls there, where the Clark Tech building is now. And we also did it at the Women's Town Club and at the theater, at the ball. And the artists would take work and it would stay for 1 to 3 months, and then it would be changed. And at that time we did not charge anything at all for them. Then it got to be something of a real job to transport those things, hang them, take them down, and so forth. So we cut it out for a while, and then when we reinstituted the program, we started charging for it. And part of the reason for doing it originally was to show off the works of the local artists. However, we found that very few pieces were purchased. I think we had one purchase out of about 3 years of all that work.
And didn't something go to the libraries too, some of the paintings? Or
None from here, no. The library has their own source of exhibitions.
That's interesting, because I was just talking to Nancy Johnson earlier, and you know, our rental program in the little gallery. I said the library's going to be completed before we know it, and this is the place we ought to get our work in for the rental. And she said, "Oh, I hadn't thought about it." And I said, "Well, I wonder if they have their own art collection." I don't know.
They do.
Word.
I don't know how extensive it is, but they do have one.
Well, but this is a much larger building than Warder. You know, we should be able to do something. We had this extensive rental program that we have in the little gallery is really lucrative and growing. And I'm quite impressed with it. I've had literally nothing to do with it, except I'm on that committee and I listen to the reports. But I'm really impressed with it.
I think the Art in the Hospital program has made a contribution.
tremendous.
Very
Very
much so.
definitely.
That was, the idea of that was brought back by Harriet Levine.
From Mayo's when she was
Well, I don't know if
first.
it was made at some hospital at any rate, and she was so impressed with the program that she hoped somehow it could be developed here. And it seemed a natural for the Art Center to adopt it, which it has, thanks to the board, and they contribute, and
How many actual prints do
I have
we
no
own
idea.
for that program?
I have no idea where it stands
Surprisingly
now.
large number.
I think it's in the
I,
vicinity of 400, Betty. I think they have 200, or maybe between 4 and 5. I'd have to check with one of the committee, because I don't know definitely. But we thought it was a little
I think the time
higher.
has come where they're weeding out some too. So, I mean, it fluctuates a little bit.
Do you ever sell them?
They do not want to get into that. So they decided, and this was really Harriet's idea, that she brought back, because that isn't the purpose
Sure.
of the program at all. And so they set a fee of something like $150 for the art, good, better, and different, to discourage it.
Oh,
Because really that isn't the purpose of the program.
well now our rentals are for sale, and we do sell a lot of them.
But as far as the Art in the Hospital is concerned, Betty, it's a lot of work to get those things, pick them out, get them framed, cart them over there, etc.
Yeah.
And so if they were continually being depleted, it would be hard on the program. But we do make a few exceptions. This year I asked the committee if they would make an exception. My next door neighbor was an old gentleman of 90 years old, and he was in the hospital, and he liked his painting so well that I said he wanted to take it with him to the nursing home. So I asked the committee if they would let him, and they did give us a deposit for the painting, and we let him take it because it had grown to be his painting. He was in the hospital, I think, 5 or 8 weeks, and we thought, well, if that could help him get better.
Sure.
So it
It's
didn't,
amazing
but,
how certain patients become attached.
Oh, yes, I
And
was
they
out
really,
there.
they don't want the painting changed in their room. They want that
That's
one.
right.
And
Well, it
what we
helped
have
them.
done also is that if someone really wants that print, we will look it up where we got it and let them find out where they can get it and give that information to them. By the same token, I think there are two interesting stories about art in the hospital. One was that we all loved that cat. You remember the cat with the big eyes? I don't know who the artist is. Well, a lot of people did. I think it's now been removed from the collection, but in the daytime, people liked that cat, and a couple of times it was put in rooms, and the person who was ill liked it in the daytime, and it woke up at night and those eyes staring at it, and so they asked that the painting be removed. And
But
also,
that has happened, not just with the cat, but people have very personal ideas about art. And there have been occasions when some patient just has not liked the print and wanted it out. And then they take something else in. But they have the option of choosing their own anyway.
With this quick turnaround in hospitals, I would suppose
right.
that the burden would be on us to turn quickly or to remove and be flexible. That takes a lot of time.
One thing about that program, it's interesting, the hospitals have cooperated tremendously, and each hospital has had its own cart made to carry the prints. And it's just been very, very successful.
It's a good thing they did too, because those prints are unwieldy and have to be put at the right angle or they
That's
fall off
right.
the cart.
That's right.
Yeah. Another recommendation for prints in the hospital is that everybody be 6 feet tall.
Okay.
Oh, trying to get the prints up there, even though I'm 5'6", and every so often they've been above my head.
Well, people are often prone to hang everything too high.
Yes, they do. They hang them up at eye level up here. It's ridiculous.
Bunch of giants, then hanging them.
Right. Yes.
we haven't mentioned the library in which we sit, other than the fact that we
right.
were sitting in it.
Yeah, that's right.
This has been quite a wonderful addition to the services of the Art Center. We constantly have people bring us paintings to look at to see if they are any good, or if they are by a well-known artist. We had someone in this morning with that. So we have a number of books that we can look in to find artists that are World Series books and contain artists from the whole world. And Paul Helmuth also was very anxious for us to have a decent library because, as I understand it, when I first came here in 1970, the library was in a corner of my office. Then as we began to think about building, we moved it into what is now the sculpture room, which had been the storeroom. So we cleaned up the storeroom, made the library in there, and it evolved into this lovely room.
And this was the beautiful North Light studio right where we're sitting.
Yes.
Everybody was a little upset.
But anyway, here we have it, and the fact that we raised the ceiling and gave us a balcony here so that we could expand was very good. And the books are used by students for how to.
But you no longer let them go out.
No, we originally did, but we found that we lost so many, and art books are so expensive that they have to use, anyone can come in and use them here, but they're really only reference type things,
And we have an excellent librarian.
Yes, so
Mary
Mary
Miller.
Miller. Mary Miller was the one who
Thank you.
honchoed the whole collection and she worked with the librarian of the Dayton Art Institute and also the Boston Museum of Fine Arts in developing what we needed for the original books that we purchased.
And
Is
she
Mary-
knew how to set up the whole system.
Right.
Is Mary a board member of Warder? Is she?
I don't think she's
Active
a
in
board.
that?
No, I don't. I know she isn't now. She may have been in the past.
I want to find out who to talk to get our art rentals
Well,
into
I think
the
that's very
library.
important. Yes.
And I don't know who to talk to. I don't know who's.
Is Marion Robertson? She was at some
She
She
has
was
been.
at one time, wasn't she? Well, Mary Miller Mary or Marion would be able to put me onto the right person.
Or Sawyer, you could talk to Sawyer himself, I suppose, and he could refer you to.
I don't know it, but that doesn't matter.
Just go up and
He's
say,
the
"How do you
head
do?"
librarian.
Yeah.
Now I know you.
Not- yes.
Where would I contact him?
The best thing to do is call the library and find out. I don't think his office is in the present building, but they'll give you a number for him.
What is the name? S-A-U-N?
S-
T-E-R? Saunter?
S-A-U-T-E-R.
S-A-U-T-E-R. Read the name.
Yeah.
Just don't put a face with it at all.
Can you go ahead, Janie?
No, it's about something else.
I was only going to say, can you think of any subjects we haven't covered?
Well, what about the craft show that you have in the fall? It's really tremendous.
Yes, we haven't mentioned that. That started in 1972. Not in 1972, but in 1970
Also.
And
Also.
it began as a summer art fair on the grounds, and we had originally mostly artists as opposed to craftspersons. And so we had it several years, and we found that there again, not everybody is going to buy a piece of art at your fair, so we allowed craftspeople to come in, and it has grown. And then also, the Arts Council asked if they could come in on the show with us and do publicity and entertainment and that sort of thing for us for half of the proceeds, so we said yes. And so it has grown ever since. And I think, I can't remember the proceeds the first year, but anyway, it
Mary
now,
Gray chaired the first one.
yes,
Remember
and then
Mary?
Nancy Clark was the second
Yeah.
chairman. And so they worked along all of the time, and it has grown over the years.
That designers workshop, designers furnishing, and that you had here last year for the first time, was it?
Yes, and it will be repeated this year as well in March. But getting back to the art fairs, we had them only in the summertime originally, and then it was someone's suggestion that we have one in the fall, so we had it the week of Thanksgiving for a number of years.
Well, it got so popular.
Yes.
And we got larger and larger crowds. Didn't someone say, well, we ought to catch the Christmas?
Probably so. That's probably
Market
what's
it.
involved.
Yeah. You still have it?
Yes,
That's
we
so
have
grand.
had.
Twice a year.
And another big item is the pottery department. Isn't that something that's...
Yes, that really wasn't original to the building either. You're right. When I first came here, we had no wheel at all. They just did hand building. And then we got one wooden wheel that someone built for us. That was a pedal type push, you know.
I took
Good.
pottery.
And,
It took
oh,
me.
listen.
Yeah.
But if you don't think that was terrible during those years, we'd have a pottery class of 8 or 10 people in one wheel. The bane of my existence.
There were a lot of hand-built pots.
And people would come and say, I'm going to take this class, and there's only one wheel. So the instructor would have to give them a half an hour or 15 minutes apiece, and I thought maybe we shouldn't even have this class. But then when Paul began to talk about the addition, I said we must have some additional equipment. for what we have, because the classrooms were very bare back in those years, and as you mentioned earlier, very little in the way of equipment. So with the $50,000 that we were going to be able to use, of the 350,000, 300 was for the building and 50,000 was for equipment. And so in that 300 of the 50,000, I bought wheels for the pottery department.
How many do we have now?
10. Bought 10. And
That's what-
that wasn't,
And they're
it was
used.
like heaven right away. And I bought the ones called scut wheels that are supposed to be, where's that? I better amend that statement. I think the scut is the kill. Anyway, it's still serving us very well all through these years.
I think our sculpture department and pottery are outstanding.
They are. As a matter of fact, I met someone the other night, and they said that their daughter had taken classes here, and she was interested in continuing pottery when she got to Miami University a few years ago, and their department was not as good as ours.
I have
And
heard
thought
that from my
That was
own
a
daughter.
great commendation. I've heard that from other people too, not about just Miami, but I've had a few people come and say, well, your department is better than this or that college.
Well, it needs its own dirty space. You keep it as clean as possible, but there's no way that you can combine a very clean function such as stained glass was, and pottery and sculpture. Especially pottery spreads out all over the place. And there you are trying to cut a fine line on a piece of glass with a little bump of ceramic pot, a teeny little one underneath that you didn't think was there, and you thought you'd brushed off, and bingo goes the glass in 12 different pieces.
A little frustrating.
Oh,
Do
boy.
you remember the tap and the plumbing problems in the
Oh.
old Durham due to the sculpture?
Sculpture,
the
oh.
trap. Now there's a
We
trap.
didn't have a trap.
And that's
Yes.
one of the worst
plumber
jobs
was
in the place. to
frequent.
clean
We
that
couldn't afford
track.
him the
Oh,
first
it's
time.
terrible.
Mm.
Oh,
We're clean.
yeah, I know.
Sculpture department is very clean.
It is. It really
Thank
is.
you.
I think another thing, which is a relatively new thing, is what happened last Saturday, was it? There was a student show that was held in the evening as usual. There were a few additions. One was that a lot of children were there from the pottery department especially, showing their pots. And the children of students, adult students were there. And the place was very gay because the Marty Cook Clark County Jazz Band.
I heard
Oh,
about
how
That
about
was
that?
marvelous.
Excellent.
It really was great.
Martha
Really?
Coyle
Didn't get
sparked
there,
that
I'm
group, and
That
she
must
just
have been marvelous.
the whole place was kind of bouncing.
And those
Especially the
children, did you
kids.
see the
They
I
sure
just
did.
love
Isn't that great?
Marvelous.
And then there was big old Paul Fields, he's 10 feet tall, and he was dancing. It was just a joyous,
Yeah. It was a great addition to that.
great addition. Well, I'm not speaking for music every time, that's not my point, but I
I'd
remember
like
that
to have it
the,
every time.
Sure, we don't
Well, the
like it.
price was right.
Yes,
Yes.
indeed.
That we can afford.
That
I
was
think
so
the
good of them
variety
to
of-
do it.
Well, they all enjoyed it.
Do you think
that-
they'll come back?
I think they would, and you don't want them every time because that's a special kind of noisy music.
Are
Oh,
you
it-
referring
it
to the
worked
preview of the
well.
student show?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But there is
I
other
missed
kind
it.
of music which would be quite compatible. Harp goes well here as well. Piano, strings. There's a lot that can be done. Why don't you talk to the symphony and see what they can come up with?
I think the luncheons on the lawn or picnics on the lawn, I think that's a wonderful thing.
And the ability to come inside if it's raining.
Mm-hmm.
I think that one year, it was last year, the year before, they were all the events were inside the whole year because it rained exactly at the time of the luncheon on the lawn.
Going
That's
back
done.
to the sculpture department, Ralph, is Milt still donating his time?
No,
and
he
teaching?
hasn't for years.
No, he's
Is he?
being
renewed?
paid very
Okay.
modestly.
Well, I know years back he never accepted
That's
a
right.
thing, but I didn't know but I know he's been a wonderful asset to that department of this place.
On a rather different subject, are other sculpture departments around the country coming back to the way we have done it for years with the live model and that sort of thing?
I don't really have enough experience about it to tell you, Mary. Over the years, we have had the request to do more modern things, but anything that would involve steel or whatever, we don't have the
Welding.
equipment for in the or the room for the equipment.
Well, for the
So- Go ahead.
for the record, for as long as Milt has taught, and that's been about as long as the Art Center has functioned,
Right.
we've used a traditional classical approach to sculpture. I mean, you use a live model, use a nude model, and you have to learn to see. It's a very different procedure from what's being done now, what has been done recently in the art schools, and I think that has to do with a deterioration of sculpture that we're getting it out into the public now.
Isn't that too bad?
Hmm.
Well, there are a lot of basics in all the forms of art
Sure.
that are lost. Absolutely lost.
The days when you, Chris, just took a drawing of that model outside and just drew it in black and white until you could really see it are gone, and that is a terrible discipline to inflict on anybody, but it's worthwhile.
I was going through some old material from my college days. Now that's old. But we had nothing. I spent practically 2 years doing nothing but sketches of plaster heads of the
White
Greek gods
plaster
and
heads.
the, you know, the biblical characters. We drew and we drew and we drew, and the basics, and my notes are marvelous. I love to go through them because they're things I had forgotten that I learned that nobody teaches today. They don't even know they exist.
It's hard work, wasn't it?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
But I was amazed that I had just really forgot.
Hmm.
But they don't dwell on drawing anymore.
Can you think of anything else?
No, I think that's pretty well covered the whole waterfront right now.
I think it has too. Really, really, it's a great pleasure, isn't it, to look back and see this achievement of all these years. And
I think
solid
it shows
thing.
in the work. But the student shows have improved through the years.
They really have.
I can remember some of the very first shows, and
They're different.
they are better now. I mean, every once in a while you'll see something that's getting there.
That's getting there.
We have a number of people, I suppose you always have had, even before my time, but we have a number of repeat people. We have those cards, you know, where you sign up, and we have some that have practically filled cards. I don't even know how many slots there are on there.
Their names might be Jane Hollenbeck and Mary Cook.
Right.
Still trying.
And Betty Rohr.
I haven't taken any courses for a while, but I'll
Hasn't
be
been
back.
all that long, though.
I'll be back. Still learning, trying to.
And Ralph took a class or two as well.
Oh, yes, that was with the live model too.
Was it?
Well, absolutely.
That's good.
You
You know,
were.
Connie did a ceramic, clay, about this big, very wonderful sense of proportion and good, solid forms. And I don't think she ever did much after that I know of.
She says she will.
Yes, we would have to get her started on that again.
I remember when she was working in wax in Milt's
Yeah.
class
Yeah.
that I was in one time, and it was perfectly fascinating.
Mm.
That is a form of sculpture I am really, I'd love to learn.
It is.
I think with these crooked
Devilish.
hands I could manage that.
I think wax is just the most awful thing to work
I
with.
never ever tried it.
Well,
It just fascinated
if
me.
you
because
start with it,
was
I'll come with you.
finely detailed. And
Well,
that's
that's,
or
very
any
where,
of it.
that's where you get it.
Or managing
Yeah.
wax itself is tough.
Yeah, well,
Well, the Historical Society, thank you very much. We will
Right.
make 2 copies of this tape, one for you, one for us.
Oh, good.
You know what we're doing, Ralph, I take it. We're
Yes.
updating the century for publication around 2000 of these, the Historical
Yes.
Society. And we're trying to get our most senior members now. You know, I'll turn this on.